One thing that has made a huge difference in the quality of my pots when throwing big is compressing the rim after every lift. It allows me to make a stronger vessel, thinner walls, and keeps wobbles at a minimum. Hi.
Hi, I'm Daisy.
I'm Asa.
We are the King and the Flower. Welcome back to our channel. Today we have a very special video. Asa is going to show us how to throw big.
Yes, I'm going to throw one bowl out of 25 pounds of clay.
Let's get started.
I like to prepare the clay while it's in the bag still. You have this fresh block and it's very square. That's not very easy for throwing. So I learned from an older potter that if you just open the bag but keep the clay in there, you can smash it around a little bit to at least round it into a bit of a pillar shape. And then once it's into more of that cylinder, you can then attach it to the wheel and you can continue to center it on the wheel, as you see I'm doing right here. After having it a little bit more like a cylinder, I attach it to the wheel and then I like to beat it into the shape of a gumdrop. This allows it to flow easier on the wheel and not be pushed around so much when it's getting up to speed. Once I start spinning it, I like to start at the top and really smooth it out, pushing down towards the bottom. I then lift the base up towards the top and kind of give it a little bit more of a cone shape, and then take it back down and repeat that process a couple times. I tend most often to use the heels of my hands to push the clay into center, while also remaining very braced. I am always leaning into the clay, using the full weight of my body. What I'm doing right now, I'm pulling it back towards myself. Sometimes I find that to be more helpful than pushing for centering, and I really only ever do that for these bigger pots. After I've taken it down and it's nice and centered, then it comes into the making the hole or making the divot, whatever you call it. And that I'm still trying to figure out how to do it well myself. I tend to use my fingertips kind of all smushed together, all four of them kind of coming to a point. And I make sure it's wet in there. I go in slowly and I try and keep very steady as I do it, because if I mess that up, it's a pain to really get it back opened and centered. But I also find it important that once you've opened it up, to make sure it is centered still. Part in between from drilling your hole and actually moving into the lifting stage is, I think, where the most patience is required for these big pots. You kind of take it for granted on the smaller pots, but on these big ones you really need to make sure that it is centered. If the inside isn't centered or the outside is off, it's going to throw off the rest of it, and you're going to be spending a lot of time lifting and taking a long time making this pot. This pot took me about an hour in total to throw. So this step of just making sure it's centered inside and out, you really got to be patient and you really got to be thorough with it. Another thing that is incredibly important with these bigger vessels is to really define that base on the inside. Unfortunately, you're not going to see it, but just really compressing that inside base, going back and forth over it, making sure it's nice and smooth and nice and tight. It's really important, because with these bigger vessels, they have an added amount of pressure with when it is drying. They want to create an S-crack because there's more weight on that base. And if they're not compressed, they will crack on you, and then all this work that you just did throwing a 25-pound piece really didn't make a whole lot of lasting work, because if it just cracks at the bottom, it's not really useful anymore. When it comes to lifting, I do have kind of an inconsistency with how I do it. Sometimes I will use my fingers, sometimes more towards the beginning, like where it's starting to be lifted, I will push out from the inside and support it with the heel of my hand on the outside, which I typically lift using my outside hand and my inside hand as support. But when I'm lifting big like this, starting out, I find it to be a little easier to do it the opposite way, where I use the inside hand to push out and my outside hand to support. But no matter what I'm doing with it, compressing that rim at the top is probably the most important thing that you would pick up from this entire video. If you're not compressing your rim after every lift, you are likely going to make that top nice and thin way faster than you mean to. And what that'll just take away any integrity from the vessel as a whole. If you think about it, the top of the walls are the part that is leading the rest of the vessel into existence. Every lift ends at the top of the wall, but the part that is getting higher and higher is the rim. And so that's why it's important to have that rim be very strong and have a lot of integrity. It holds together the rest of the pot. It leads the pot into the future of its existence. If that rim doesn't have integrity, the whole thing is going to fall apart. It also just looks right to me to have a fat rim. I sometimes think of pots as people, and I imagine if I'm throwing a really big pot, if I wanted to look like a really good pot, would I have a bodybuilder with a really thin neck? It would just look kind of weird. So having a big pot with a thick rim just looks right to me, but functionally it does make it stronger. So even if you don't like the look of it, you can finish it off later. At the very end, you can thin it out however you like. But while you're throwing, I can tell you that thick rim really does give the rest of the vessel a strength that it wouldn't have if it was a thin rim all the way through. Another thing to consider when you're lifting is that as it gets thinner, the clay gets easier to move. And so while you have a lot of a buildup at the base, all the way at the bottom of the vessel, as you get higher and higher, that clay is already getting thinner, so it's getting easier to press. So while you're lifting, as you would with a smaller vessel, you want even walls. You don't want it to be as thin as possible. You want it to be as consistent as possible. So you have a lot of weight at the very bottom there. So you need to start with a lot of pressure to get that wall lift going. But as you get higher, you need to gradually lighten up on the pressure because you want those walls to be even. You don't want them to just be thin. You want them to be about the equal thickness at the bottom as you do towards the top. That's what makes a good vessel. A nice even spread, not just having it be thin in one spot. Anybody can throw it thin in one spot, but a good potter will make it nice and even all the way through. That's why if you've ever taken a pottery class, oftentimes the teacher, when you're learning, will throw a cylinder and then they will cut it in half down the middle to show you the walls. Because if it's really fat at the bottom and it's really thin at the top, even if it looks good, it's not a good vessel. So as I'm lifting, I try not to add a whole lot of water, especially with these bigger pots, because they tend to absorb the moisture pretty well. Clay, just in general, likes to soak up moisture. And especially with these bigger pots, they have a lot more weight that they need to be able to support. So the drier clay is, the more stiff it is, the stronger it will be. But if I keep adding water, it doesn't matter how big I want to make that pot. If it's overly saturated, it's not going to be able to actually hold its own weight. So I keep using slip. I keep using the slurry of clay that comes off of it as I'm lifting it. You see it like accumulate on my hand, and then I take it off and I rub it on the walls again. I keep using the slip because then I'm not adding any moisture to the water, to the clay. I just keep reusing. Like you see as I run my hand up right now, I'm just reapplying the slip there. I'm not adding any new water. And this allows me to throw bigger and thinner because the strength of the vessel is not being compromised by the saturation of water into clay. Sometimes you look at your pot and you think that it's off because of how you're looking at it. But take a look at the bottom of my pot right now, and you see that ring of untouched clay and it just kind of is wobbling, but then you look at the top of it and it's not. So even if it looks like it's unsteady, it doesn't mean that it's hopeless. Sometimes, and myself especially, we tend to think that any wobble means it's a terrible pot, especially if you're trying to be a perfectionist. You want to throw the most even, perfect pot you can. And that's something that's good. You should strive for that. But it doesn't mean that if you have any sort of wobble, you should just scrap the whole thing. I mean, how many pieces are just going to be destroyed because of a little wobble when they don't need to be? So here I'm starting to stretch it out and make it more into the bowl shape. You can see it's wider already, and I just do that with my hands. But now when I really want to start taking it out into a bowl shape and really thinning out those walls, I like to use 2 wooden ribs, one on the inside and one on the outside, to really compress the walls, to make them really strong and thin, but also to really just have a strong hand on the clay. You know, my big hands are sometimes kind of soft, the fingertips are kind of meaty, and I find that the hard wood really does a good job of being firm with the clay, firmer than my fingertips can be sometimes. And they also just tend to smooth it out a bit. You know, when you have a rib working on a vessel, that's often what you get, is a nice smooth finish, versus if you use a sponge or your fingertips, you kind of leave a ring around it, or you leave an excess of slip around it. But the ribs really do work to really finish off the piece and also give it a strength that it doesn't normally have. I find it to be really helpful, especially when making bowls, to have a rounded rib on the inside. I don't have a rounded rib, so that little circle you see me working with on the inside is actually a marker for disc golf. It's a mini disc, and I just had it one day and I was like, maybe this will work, and it actually ended up working out great. And it works out really well because you just have this little circle making a perfectly rounded inside. Where if I had a wooden rib that has a straight edge and a slightly curved edge, I have to figure out how to press in with the curved edge while also not having the edges or the corners digging in. But if I have a rounded one, it's always going to be a rounded press. That really allows for a nice bowl shape, and it allows for a lot of control. There is compressing the rim again. Going to throw this, I had in mind exactly what I wanted, so I was a bit more intentional about my shaping. I've known people who just let the clay decide what it becomes, and I've known people who know from the very beginning exactly what it's going to look like. I like a bowl to look like half a sphere. Like if you took a globe and cut it in half, that's what I think a bowl should look like. during these finishing steps, you can make any adjustment you want. You can flare the lip, you can thin it up a little bit, and don't forget you're also going to be doing stuff after it dries up a little bit more, such as trimming. I end up carving this vessel. A lot of the detail work is done after the general form has been made. You know, it has to set up for a little while to actually become leather hard so I can do the carving. So be sure about what form you want.
Oh, so we have an Etsy store. This is one of our pots. Look at how beautiful that is. Yeah, Asa carved the details on it, and we have a bunch of functional wear that you guys can purchase if you'd like to support what we do with the educational videos, and if you just want to support our passion for pottery.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. Don't forget to leave a comment down below in case you have any questions. If you have any tips, please share them. We would love to hear them. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video.
Bye!
Hi!
Wait.